Dama Fortuna, aka the fairy godmother from Shrek, is wickedly villainous. I made a bunch of backed and theorized claims about her in the first part to this now two-part series, such as how she actually wanted Shrek to save Fiona for her own grand scheme reasons. I also concluded that she is responsible for all of the villains in Far Far Away being evil, and she did it because she wants her son to marry Fiona, so that she can be on top of Far Far Away's political setting. I figured that this was all because she wanted revenge on the kingdom, perhaps because she had anger regarding the previous royals, Queen Lilian's family, and because she wants to take everything over because of her newfound inferiority complex. It's utterly imperative that you watch part 1 before this, or if you've already seen it, rewatch it immediately, because that video will flow right on into this one. And here's the surprise. I have more evidence for all of this that starts making my whole theory even more likely, and infinitely more shockingly creepy. Hello, I'm the Theorizer, and as you know, in part 1 I claimed that Dama Fortuna has ruined the lives of many villains, making them evil. More proof of her possibly ruining the lives of the villains is seen in Rumpelstiltskin. It just so happened that Shrek saved Fiona immediately as Harold and Lilian were about to sign a paper that would throw away their kingdom. The fairy godmother's time with all of this is utterly impeccable, and Rumpelstiltskin's rage only grew from that point forward. She's creating villains. Another thing I talked about in part 1 is the godmother's neglection of her son, Charming. She doesn't truly care about him, and he is the means to her end, to her domination of the kingdom. I go on to explain the instances in which she doesn't tell Charming much about her plans, and this right here is more evidence of that. Charming had no idea that Shrek would show up and take Fiona, and in part 1 I made it very clear that the godmother wanted all of this to happen, and she in fact was the witch who casted the curse on Fiona to begin with. The final thing I discussed was in my major 2016 Shrek timeline video, and it was that the magic mirror, which advertised Fiona as a candidate for rescue, was a strange thing in the movie. Fiona was supposed to be on lockdown by the godmother, and she was only supposed to be rescued by Charming, so who let the mirror in on this information about Fiona? In my 2016 timeline video, I said it could have been Queen Lilian, who suspected the godmother of evil but knew nothing of the true plans, and thus let the advertisement reach Farquaad. But now, I think it was the fairy godmother who sent it. I believe it to a very high extent. Lilian never could have slipped the mirror past the godmother's plans unless the godmother wanted it to, or she did it herself. So she wanted Shrek to save Fiona. Perhaps the godmother was even behind Farquaad wanting to exterminate fairy tale characters. Perhaps she's been granting him his wishes and forced all of the fairy tale characters into Shrek's swamp so he'd be forced to meet Fiona. After all, Dama Fortuna was supposed to be in the first movie, but it was mysteriously scrapped. So, I looked for more, and when watching the first Shrek movie over again, I realized something very specific and odd about Fiona's curse. Something in its wording. Her curse turned her into an ogre by night and kept her human during the day, until her first kiss of true love, which would turn her presumably back into a human after she kissed one. In the first fairy godmother video I made, and more primarily in my big major Shrek theory of 2016, I made the very accurate claim that it was in fact the fairy godmother herself who cast the initial curse on Fiona. She was the witch who set it all into motion, as that was how it happened in the original Shrek book. The godmother did this to, jumpstart her master plans, but there's something interestingly unique about the wording to the spell. If she truly wanted Charming to save Fiona and turn her into a human, then why would she even allow this curse to have her stay an ogre to begin with? Why would the godmother make Fiona specifically allowed to become one or the other if she was so desperately wanting Fiona to get with Charming, and Charming alone? Why not just make the curse say, true love's kiss will revert you into a human? Well, she didn't do that because there's a secret agenda behind this, and she wanted Shrek to save Fiona. She somehow knew Shrek specifically would be the one to save Fiona. It's why she sent Charming in immediately after her rescue. I said all of this in part 1, but why make Fiona an ogre? Why make Shrek specifically save her? And how did she know it would all play out so precisely? If Dama Fortuna really is behind even the first movie's plot and everything, why Shrek? Why ogres? I know the answer. The fairy godmother's powers root from old-fashioned and historical witches, sort of like the ones from Shrek 4 kind of representing. The fairy godmother has deep roots in prophecies and alchemy. Yes, that kind of eerie witch. She needed Fiona's savior to be Shrek because it was always Shrek. That's how she knew. She has the ability to predict the future. I know. It's like outlandish sounding, and I intentionally shied away from talking about this in part 1, but now I have evidence staring me in the frickin' face. Her name is Dama Fortuna. In the Shrek book, she was a fortune teller. Her name means Lady Luck or Dame of Fortune. That name applies to her making others' fortunes come true, but it also means fortune teller, her occupation in the book. She uses tarot cards to narrate the first quarter of the story, and she essentially stands outside of the story and prophesizes things. If that isn't undeniably stunning proof that she's prophesized all of this and then manipulatively acted upon it, I don't know what is. It makes me think that maybe her magic is quite simply an illusion perceived by everyone, and all of her power is rooted in her ability to prophesize and predict the future. Magic's just a side effect of her paganistically vast knowledge base. So, now that we've dealt with the idea that she manipulated Shrek, Farquaad, and Far Far Away, we finally once again have to return to her basis for all of this. We know she's doing this to become the leader of Far Far Away's royalty, and we know that it likely had something to do with her abilities being feared and shunned by Lillian's family, but that's not all. What exactly did she do? Well, her cottage-turned-factory might give us some clues. Possibly, it could have very well been her first transitions of people. Using her magic to grant happy endings was likely seen as frightening and demonic back before she made it commonplace, and I bet she was shunned for it. Sort of like Rumpelstiltskin from the 4th movie. Shunned. So she began granting unhappy endings in defiance. Cruel fates in return, creating villains which only would have amplified things back at her, to the point of her removing the highest regals and forcing the position to be open for a new king, who she was going to make sure was Harold the Frog. Lots of famous people are famous for initially frowned upon things which are forgotten over time, leaving only a superstar. Oftentimes, a superstar with a famously bad attitude, as seen in her posters. She turned from forbidden and dangerous into scantily clad and notorious. The notoriety of these stars is often forgotten, or perhaps in her case, erased from the minds of all, leaving only A-list celebrities. And yes, she could have easily erased her darkest past from the minds of the citizens. She has memory potions. How do I know? I know because she can make people fall in love, which logically would require the erasing of various emotions and memories of opposing events. Perhaps it was her transition of the city, or rather her transition of one of the people on her walls of fame, but it was something that got her shunned by the ex-royals. She even advertises her creation of the Wicked Witch of the West in her cottage, which I think might have even been the tipping point for the royals. Either way, it was the same thing that we see her doing in the movie that got her shunned, and that's pushing her for fame and power. And the fairy godmother was finally put an end to by the combined power of her own magic and the central man at the start of her whole plan. How poetic. Until next time, I'm the Theorizer.